He dumped her for being poor. Now the billionaire CEO is fighting to marry the Heiress he lost. They called her nothing. A girl from nowhere, riding a second-hand bike, wearing hand-me-down shoes, and loving a man who only saw her as convenient. But hearts don't break silently. They remember. She watched him walk into success, holding everything she helped build, while pretending she never existed. Till one day, she showed up with a secret no one could erase. She didn't come to beg, but to end a lot, because the girl they abandoned was the daughter of an empire. A girl with no name. There were always whispers at events like this, the kind that curled around silk gowns and champagne flutes, low enough to hide behind but sharp enough to wound. And tonight, at the Goodman Group tech signing in Midtown Manhattan, the whispers turned into stares. Nancy Campbell stood near the back of the ballroom, her posture straight despite the eyes skimming her like she didn't belong. A caterer bumped her shoulder without apology. A woman in pearls scoffed at her flats, and on the raised stage beneath crystal chandeliers, Xavier Lee. Her ex smiled for the cameras like nothing in the world had ever touched him. He looked different in a suit. Taller, maybe, or maybe it was just the weight of betrayal that made him feel farther away now. Nancy clutched the crumpled invitation in her hand. She hadn't come to win him back. She hadn't come to beg. She came because Xavier was about to sign a multi-million-dollar licensing deal with Goodman Group, a deal built on a patent she helped him develop in a roach-infested apartment with $200 0-cent ramen dinners and her last student loan. She came to watch the lie unfold. "Hey, watch it," a man barked as she passed by, bumping into his tailored sleeve. Nancy paused. "Bank account number?" He blinked. "What?" And she repeated it, calm, almost bored. "Bank account number, or Venmo, whichever works for you." "You think you can pay me off?" His voice rose. "Do you even know what car this is?" He pointed toward the valet outside. "It's a Rolls-Royce." She pulled out her phone, thumbed a few keys, and hit send. His screen buzzed. $200,000, 0 cents. He gawked. "What? How?" "The extra is for emotional distress," she said gently. "Take care now." She walked away before he could stammer another syllable. The silence behind her felt like a wave holding its breath. But in front of her, a different storm was waiting. Xavier's mother, Dolores Lee, stood near the stage arranging flowers in a tall glass vase, her diamond bracelet catching the light. She turned as Nancy approached, her lip curling. "I thought you were out riding your little rickshaw," Dolores sneered. "You don't belong here." Nancy smiled thinly. "Didn't she once say anthuriums symbolize success and love?" "I said they were for real love, not delusional girls chasing men who've outgrown them." Nancy's voice was steady. "Then consider this my farewell." She stepped past her and climbed the stage stairs. Xavier's jaw clenched the moment he saw her. "Nancy," he said in warning. "I just wanted to say congratulations." Her voice was soft, but it carried. "You said once, when you succeeded, you'd propose, remember?" He laughed nervously. The room was watching now. "Our son's future is bright," Dolores interjected loudly. "You're still covered in mud." Nancy turned to her. "What makes you think I ever needed your approval?" "You're not from our world," Xavier said flatly. "I can't marry someone who embarrasses me." Nancy let the words wash over her like a tide. She'd already survived. "Good," she said, stepping back from him. "Then let's be clear." The room hushed. Bailey Goodman, the vice president's daughter, stood smirking by Xavier's side, clinging to his arm like a handbag. "I'm not asking to be in your world," Nancy said. "I came to remind you who built the bridge." Bailey scoffed. "You think anyone here believes your nonsense?" A security guard began walking toward Nancy. "Do you know how Xavier got his funding?" Nancy asked the crowd. "Do you know who paid his tuition when he dropped out of NYU to chase a dream he didn't even know how to spell?" Whispers stirred. "I did. Every dollar, every prototype, every sleepless night. You see a rising star." She looked at Xavier. "I see a man who forgot who gave him the sky." Xavier stepped forward. "Enough," You're making a fool of yourself." Olivia nodded. A deep voice cut in. Calm, unshakable. "Chris Goodman." The room fell into stunned silence as the elusive CEO walked through the crowd in a black suit and unbothered expression. He stopped beside Nancy and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "She's not making a fool of herself," he said. "She's reclaiming what she gave." Bailey's face turned white. Chris looked at Xavier with icy clarity. "You called her unworthy," he said quietly, "so let me make it plain." He turned to the room. "She was my wife." Gasps swept through the ballroom like wind through glass. Nancy didn't speak. She didn't move. She didn't have to. Because in that moment, the woman they called nothing became the woman no one could ignore. And the man they mocked, the nobody in the rickshaw, was suddenly the most powerful man in the room. Chamber 1. 5 years forgotten. They say you don't notice the moment something begins to end. That endings don't come with thunder or sirens, but with silence. And in the quiet that stretched between Nancy Campbell and Xavier Lee, the end began like a hairline crack on glass. Back then, it was just the two of them. She was 20 and quiet, studying engineering and economics at NYU on a scholarship she never told Xavier she didn't need. He thought she was scraping by, like him, splitting ramen packets, holding 2 part-time jobs, working late at the library. That's what made him feel like a man. He never knew her father was Leonard Campbell. And she never told him. Because when Xavier looked at her, he didn't see the Campbell fortune. He saw her. Or so she thought. They lived in a cramped studio apartment on the Lower East Side, walls thin enough to hear the couple next door fight about laundry and forgiveness every other night. There was one lamp, one window, a futon that folded in half, and dreams. Nancy held on to those dreams like they were the only real thing in the world. "I'll build it," Xavier said one night, hunched over his sketchbook with eyes full of fire. "This biometric drive, Nancy, it's going to change the world." "You will," she said, pouring him tea, her fingers red from the night shift. "You just need time." He looked up at her then, full of ambition and half-promises. "I just need you." And she smiled. What she didn't say was that she'd already emptied her personal account to pay for his prototype. That she'd taken out an untraceable withdrawal from the Campbell family trust. That her inheritance had quietly become his foundation. She didn't want him to love her for her last name. She wanted him to love her because she stayed when things were small and hard and unseen. And for a while, it worked. He kissed her like he believed in fate. They mapped futures out on diner napkins. They were going to change the world. Together. But the world changed them first. 2 years later, Xavier started dressing differently, buying monogram shirts, whispering on calls late into the night. "We investors," he told her once, not meeting her eyes. "I'm close, Nancy, so close." She nodded, even as she quietly sold her old violin on eBay to cover his legal fees for the patent filing. One day, he came home with a bottle of champagne. "For us?" she asked, surprised. "For the future," he said. "I got a lead on Goodman Group. They're scouting disruptive tech. If I land this..." He trailed off, eyes wide, heart full of something she couldn't quite touch anymore. She didn't say it, but she knew. If he landed Goodman Group, he wouldn't need her anymore. And then, just like that, it happened. The proposal meeting, the phone call from Goodman's assistant, the suit, the invitation to a tech innovation gala, a chance to pitch the drive to the most powerful corporate player in America. He didn't invite her. She only found out because she saw the event flyer on the fridge, curled at the edges behind a faded photo of them from 2 years back. Coney Island, cotton candy, sunlight in his eyes. She ironed her best dress, the navy one he once said made her look. He didn't see her at first. The ballroom sparkled in gold and blue. Her heels were a decade old. Her courage was borrowed from a version of herself she barely recognized. He was surrounded by suits, by flashing lights, by a girl in silver, Bailey Goodman, VP Goodman's daughter. She laughed at his jokes like they were hers to begin with. Nancy stood near the back, by the floral arch, waiting for his eyes to find her. But they didn't. Not even once. The next week he came home late, humming. She asked how it went. "I loved it," he said, shrugging off his coat. "Bailey says they'll send over the licensing docs soon." Nancy nodded, even though her throat burned. "I saw you," he added, not looking up, "at the gala." She blinked. "You did?" He shrugged. "Didn't think you'd come. It was kind of exclusive." She smiled, like it didn't hurt. That night, she packed a small envelope. Inside was the breakdown of every wire transfer she'd made on his behalf, every receipt, every legal fee, every late-night delivery for his team. It was over $230,000, 0 cents. She slipped it into his desk drawer and went to bed without a word. He never mentioned it. Months passed. Their apartment became quieter. He stopped kissing her good morning. She stopped asking what time he'd be home. She got a call from her father's estate manager. "Miss Campbell, the trustees would like to confirm you've discontinued unauthorized withdrawals." She told them yes. Her voice didn't shake. Xavier's face was on the cover of TechRise Weekly 2 days later. He didn't thank her in the article. He thanked Bailey. On the 5th anniversary of the day they met, she made dinner. He didn't show up. He texted the next morning. "Sorry, working late. Let's talk soon." She wrote back, "We don't need to." A month later, she moved out. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't know she was going to be standing in that ballroom, weeks later, not in his arms but in front of them all, silent, proud, and done pretending. He'd spent 5 years building him. Now it was time to rebuild herself. And the first person who saw her, truly saw her, was the man standing quietly in the corner of the ballroom, watching her the way Xavier never had. Chris Goodman, Chapter 2. The girl. The first time Nancy paid for Xavier's dream, it wasn't a big deal. Just $112.17. A single Amazon order, circuit boards, a soldering kit, a biometric scanner that barely worked. He was pacing the living room barefoot, rambling about a prototype that could revolutionize data encryption. She watched him talk like he was already famous. "I'll pay you back," he said, not looking up. "I just can't miss this window." Nancy smiled. "You don't need to." He didn't argue. That was the first time, but not the last. By the second semester, it was her refund check that covered his rent. Her scholarship stipend that paid for his conference flights. Her late-night shifts at the university cafe that covered his food. And still, he never asked questions. "Things will be different one day," he said, pulling her into his chest at 3 a.m. "After another night coding, we'll have real floors, a coffee machine that doesn't leak. I'll take care of you." She laughed softly. "You already do." She didn't mean financially. She meant the way he touched her back when she was too tired to cry. The way he whispered her name when the lights were off and everything felt heavy but safe. She thought that was what love looked like, two people holding each other through the dirt. She didn't realize she was the only one holding. 2 years in, Xavier dropped out of NYU. "School's slowing me down," he said one morning, cracking eggs in their skillet like he hadn't just detonated her whole reality. "I need to go full-time on the prototype." Nancy stared at him. "And money?" He shrugged. "I'll figure it out." She nodded slowly. "Okay." She didn't tell him she'd already started working nights at a grocery chain in Brooklyn, checking out businessmen who looked like future versions of him. She didn't tell him she was secretly selling her grandmother's jewelry to cover utilities. She didn't tell him the Campbell Trust had cut her off completely. All she said was, "I believe in you." And she did. Even when he didn't look back anymore. When he started taking meetings in Midtown, Nancy pressed his shirts. When he complained about the subway, she paid for Ubers. When he said his laptop crashed, she bought him a new one on her emergency card. "It's not a big deal," she told herself each time. "It's just money." But the money started to feel like blood. And she was bleeding alone. The last $20,000, 0 cents she gave him, came from her mother's personal fund, one she had access to with an old, still-working code. The wire was marked, Lee Patent Seed, Private Gift, and she typed it slowly. Her hand shook as she pressed send. He never said thank you. He did, however, post a photo of himself at a private tech gala 2 nights later. New suit, new watch, new smile. No, Nancy? She confronted him once. Just once. I noticed you didn't mention me in the feature, she said, referencing the TechCrate blog that listed him as one of Manhattan's top under-30 inventors. He replied, his tone flat. I didn't think it mattered. I was there. You were supportive, he said, but that's not the same as contributing technically. Our stomach twisted. Contributing technically? I funded it all. Xavier didn't flinch. Nancy, if you want credit, I can add you to the footnotes. She stared at him like he was a stranger. No, she said quietly. That's okay. She didn't want to be a footnote in a story she ghost wrote. One night, when he was out late with investors, Nancy sat on their futon, surrounded by receipts. There were dozens, tucked inside a shoebox she kept under their bed. Patents, filing fees, conference tickets, Playmate materials, his mother's prescriptions when their insurance wouldn't cover it. And she added them all up. $242,713.91. She held the final number in her lap and stared at it like it might speak. But numbers didn't lie, and neither had she. She had paid for every step of his success, and all he had given her in return was silence. After the gala, when he ghosted her for 4 days, Nancy packed her things. He came home the 5th morning and found the apartment empty, except for a file folder left on his desk. Inside it, every receipt, every bank statement, every proof of transaction. On the last page, she wrote a single sentence. You don't owe me anything, because you already gave me the answer I needed. 2 weeks later, she was driving a borrowed Uber shift at midnight just to make rent, when she saw his face on a billboard over Madison Avenue. She developed a mind behind BioLock. Her chest went cold. He was holding the prototype in one hand, wearing a custom suit, smiling. And she'd held that same prototype once, in a dingy kitchen, where the solder was still hot and the hope was still hers. Now she didn't even recognize the man holding it. And she thought that was the end. Until the day Goodman Group's licensing event invited the public. Until the day Xavier's name appeared on the guest list. Until the moment her phone buzzed from an unknown number. Come if you want to see what success looks like. She stared at the screen. Then she opened her banking app. She still had access to a private Campbell account her father hadn't frozen yet. Just enough. And she made the transfer. Then she pressed confirm. It wasn't to Xavier, as it was to herself. To remind her that she wasn't poor. She was just pretending to be someone he could understand. That's why when she walked into the Goodman ballroom weeks later, her hair in a simple twist, her dress pressed, her posture quiet but unshakable, she didn't come to beg for love. She came to bury the last 5 years. And everyone who ever confused her silence for weakness. Chapter 3. The signing she wasn't invited to. Manhattan's sky had turned to brushed steel by the time Nancy reached the venue. The Goodman Tower shimmered against the gloom like it didn't notice the weather or the people it stepped over. Inside, the main ballroom buzzed with soft jazz and sharper laughter. Every guest wore the same polished sheen, satin, silk, $1,000 smiles. Nancy's heels tapped out of rhythm against the marble floor as she moved through the crowd, eyes darting for one face. She hadn't been invited. She knew that. But she also knew Xavier. He couldn't resist attention, especially when it came wrapped in media coverage and billionaire deals. And today, he was signing a multi-million-dollar patent licensing agreement with the Goodman Group, a deal she helped build. A future he planned to erase her from. Nancy smoothed her navy coat, thrifted clean with a hem she stitched herself, and crossed into the lion's den. Xavier stood center stage, surrounded by executives and flashbulbs. The press clung to his words. Bailey Goodman was on his arm, smiling like she owned the place. Because, in many ways, she did. Vice President Goodman's daughter, heir to a media empire, and now Xavier's strategic partner. "Nancy," someone said, mock surprised. "What are you doing here?" It was Bailey. Dressed in metallic blue, diamonds at her throat, her eyes dragged over Nancy's outfit with a curled lip. "I thought this was an exclusive event," Bailey said, her voice sweet as acid. "Did you get lost on your delivery route?" "I'm here to congratulate Xavier," Nancy replied evenly. "We used to build things together. I just wanted to see what success looked like up close." Bailey blinked. Her smile tightened. "That's rich," she said. "Though I'm sure you're used to rich, just not in the literal sense." Laughter rippled around them from nearby guests. Nancy turned to leave until she saw Xavier step onto the platform. He wore a navy suit that matched the one she'd saved to buy him years ago. His hair was perfectly styled. His smile was for the cameras, not for her. The host spoke into the mic. "Please welcome Xavier Lee, the brilliant mind behind the groundbreaking BioLock technology, a proud new partner of the Goodman Group." Applause erupted. And then, Xavier saw her. For a second. Just one, something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Regret? Guilt? But then it vanished. He looked through her, and kept walking. Nancy stood in the back as the ceremony moved forward. Papers signed, flashbulbs fired, champagne flutes clinked. The crowd surrounded him like royalty, until someone pushed past her. Dolores Lee, Xavier's mother, was heading toward the buffet with a scowl. "I told you she'd show up," Dolores hissed to a nearby woman. "Girls like her always do. Pathetic, still clinging after all this time." Nancy's jaw clenched. "Excuse me?" she said. Dolores turned. "Oh, I forgot you had a voice. I supported your son for 5 years." "One?" Dolores smirked. "You were a phase. Every boy needs one. A girl with stars in her eyes and no sense of her station." Nancy felt the sting like a slap, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out her phone. Calm, cold, collected. She tapped into her account and pressed send. The woman next to Dolores blinked as her phone buzzed. "Alone. Is this?" she said, holding up the screen. "Nancy just transferred me $100,000, 0 cents. Nancy turned to Dolores. "As for your spa treatments this year, I figured you might want to look as good as the lies you keep telling." The crowd went silent. King's face drained of color. "Where did you... How?" Nancy looked at her. "I'm not poor. I just wanted to see who loved me without the money." And then she turned to leave. But Xavier stepped off the stage and blocked her path. "Wait," he said, his voice low. She stared up at him. "I thought you said you moved on," he murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "But here you are, causing a scene." Nancy exhaled slowly. "You think I'm here because of you?" "Aren't you?" he asked. "It's okay, Nancy. I get it. You're still stuck on what we had." "What we had," she said, voice steady, "was a lie I funded." He blinked. "Excuse me?" Nancy pulled out a small folded document from her clutch. She handed it to him. It was a spreadsheet. His name, her wire transfers, dates, amounts, notes. Every dollar. She stepped closer, her voice soft but sharp. "Your prototype? I paid for it. Your tuition? Me. Your mother's surgery? My savings. You wear success like you earned it, but you never paid the price. I did." Gasps echoed around them. Bailey approached, arms folded. "Is this how you beg for attention now? Do math?" Nancy looked at her. "I don't need to beg. I'm here to remind you all that this signing ceremony only happened because I allowed it." A voice from the crowd shouted, "What does she mean?" Nancy answered, "I'm the anonymous donor who recommended Xavier's patent to the Goodman Group." The room froze. All eyes shifted to Chris Goodman, silent at the edge of the room, his gaze fixed on Nancy. He took a step forward. "She's not lying," he said. Bailey turned. "What?" Chris nodded once. "Nancy Campbell, sole angel investor in Lee Innovations. The licensing deal came with her approval." The silence snapped. Then came the whispers. Nancy locked eyes with Xavier. "You wanted the world to see you without me? Congratulations." And she stepped past him. But this time, he didn't stop her. Just for the money meant nothing. She didn't plan on staying after the signing. Nancy never planned on making a scene at all. But when Xavier looked her in the eye and tried to paint her as desperate, something old and buried cracked open inside her. Something she'd sealed away back when love meant giving without ever being seen. She had been quiet for too long. So when the whispers started and the crowd surged, Nancy kept walking, calm, collected, down the marble hall of Goodman Tower. Until a hand caught her wrist. Not Xavier's. Not Bailey's. Chris Goodman? Tall, reserved, infamous for building an empire without ever attending his own press conferences. And now, standing beside her like he belonged there. "You shouldn't have had to do that," he said, voice even. Nancy studied his face. Clean, shaven, unreadable. But his eyes, they weren't watching her. They were seeing her. "Do what?" she asked. "Defend yourself in a room full of people who never deserved your silence in the first place." A beat passed. She didn't respond. Then Chris added, "You transferred $100,000 in public." She gave a half shrug. "I could have sent more, but I was being polite." That made him smile, just slightly, like he hadn't done it in a while. "Would you like to get some air?" he asked. The rooftop of Goodman Tower was lit in soft gold, overlooking the glittering veins of Manhattan traffic below. A private escape for the man who owned it all. Nancy stood near the edge, arms folded over her chest as the wind teased her dress. Chris handed her a glass of water, not champagne, and joined her. "You don't strike me as the type to crash parties." "I wasn't crashing," she replied. "I paid for it." While he chuckled under his breath. "I read the files you submitted," he said. "Most inventors just pitch tech. You pitched people, you built Xavier from the ground up, then let him take the credit." "I didn't let him," she said quietly. "He just did." Chris glanced sideways. "And you? Why didn't you fight for recognition?" Nancy sipped her water. "Because I wanted to see who he'd become when he thought no one was watching." She paused. "Turns out, he became exactly who he wanted to be." Chris's voice was quieter now. "And who are you?" Nancy turned to him. "I'm the girl who paid for everything and asked for nothing. But today," she exhaled, steady, "I'm not her anymore." The next morning, the tabloids were split down the middle. Mystery Heiress Fund's top tech deal, leaves CEO speechless. Gold digger crashes signing event, claims she paid for X's patent. Nancy didn't read them. She spent the day in her rented walk-up in Williamsburg, curled on the couch with coffee and an old notebook, pages filled with early schematics, napkin sketches, notes she'd written next to Xavier's drawings. She should have thrown it out. But she didn't. Not yet. A knock came at her door just after noon. When she opened it, there was no press, no drama. Just a simple envelope. Inside, a business card. Chris Goodman. Founder and CEO, Goodman Group. Handwritten, "When you're ready to build something that's actually yours, call me." 3 days later, a new headline appeared. Goodman Group quietly freezes Lee patent licensing, pending internal review. Nancy didn't call Chris. And she didn't need to. She already knew he wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for justice. But what she didn't expect was Xavier to show up at her door. It was raining when he arrived, coat half wet, hands in his pockets like a boy hidden for shelter. The same hands that once held hers under flickering Christmas lights and whispered promises. "Nancy," he said, soaked and uncertain. She didn't move. "I made a mistake," he began. "I got caught up. I thought—" "No one would ever know," she finished. He looked down. "I didn't come to fight." "Good, because you wouldn't win." She started to shut the door. He said, "What do you want?" Nancy stared at him, really stared. The man she once loved looked small. What did she want? She didn't want revenge, or repayment, or apologies soaked in rain. What she wanted was already gone. She met his eyes. "I don't want anything from you, Xavier, and that should terrify you." Then she closed the door. That night, she sat alone on the rooftop of her building, under string lights her landlord never took down. The wind was sharp, the city pulsed below. Her phone buzzed. "Chris Goodman, I meant what I said. You're not just a story, Nancy. You're a beginning." She smiled for the first time in days. And for once, she believed it. Because when you've given everything, money, years, love, and walked away with nothing, you don't rise to get even. You rise because you remember. The money meant nothing, but your worth? That was never up for sale. Chapter 5. The CEO who watched everything. The first time Chris Goodman saw her, she wasn't wearing makeup. She was standing outside the Midtown Tech Hub, where his company had just invested in 5 early-stage startups. It was late, past 9. Most people had cleared out, but there she was, holding a half-broken prototype under one arm, an old MacBook in the other, and a coffee that looked like it hadn't been sipped. She looked tired, but focused, grounded, like a woman who didn't just survive the chaos but carried it on her shoulders. He watched from across the street, the head of Goodman Group, watching a girl no one knew yet, a girl who didn't know she was already shaping something bigger than the man she was building it for. Nancy Campbell. He'd heard the name once. Quietly, her signature had appeared on an angel investment slip tied to Lee Innovations. His analysts dismissed it. She was listed as an anonymous donor. No major paper trail, just a series of private accounts and a lawyer from Albany. But Chris knew the name Campbell. Everyone in old money did. Especially when Leonard Campbell, Nancy's estranged father, had once been one of the most influential financiers in the East Coast development scene. And now his daughter was living in obscurity, funding a tech founder who never mentioned her. Chris hadn't planned to intervene. He rarely did. But that night on the sidewalk, something in her expression made him pause. She wasn't waiting for recognition. She wasn't posing. She looked like someone who'd stayed longer than she should have and still refused to leave. He admired that, because he used to be like that too. Years passed. He saw her name again on a patent contribution list, but this time it was crossed out. Moved by Xavier Lee. The licensing application only listed Xavier and one of his college friends, but Chris had the original filing, and in the draft, a line item, conceptual design notes, N. That was all he needed. He began watching, not in the corporate way, in the human way. Every time Xavier showed up in a new suit, Nancy's name disappeared further from the story. But Chris noticed patterns. Vendors paid from her old accounts, wire transfers from her trust fund that were never repaid, NDAs she never signed, because she'd never asked for credit. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted the truth to exist, even if no one saw it. And that was rare. At the signing ceremony, Chris hadn't planned to attend. He hated press events. But when his assistant mentioned Nancy might be in the audience, possibly uninvited, he changed his mind. He arrived quietly, stayed out of sight, watched her stand at the back of the room while Xavier basked in attention built on her sacrifice. And when she calmly asked for a bank number. When she transferred $200,000, 0 cents without blinking. And she stood alone, insulted, surrounded. Oh, Chris knew. It was time. He stepped into the light, not to save her, but to stand beside her. Because the woman they called nothing had just reminded an entire ballroom of everything they forgot to see. Now, 3 days later, she sat across from him in a quiet coffee shop on Lexington and 61st. Nothing expensive, no headlines, just 2 mugs and a conversation that had waited far too long. "I know who you are," he said softly. Nancy didn't flinch. "Then you know why people usually avoid me?" Chris shook his head. "You're not your father." "I'm not trying to be. That's why I'm here." She blinked. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You helped build something brilliant and got nothing for it. No credit, no equity, not even a thank you." "I wasn't looking for one," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But I was..." She frowned. "You were looking for me." Chris gave a small nod. "Everyone in this city is busy chasing the next star. I look for the ones behind the curtain, the ones who carry people on their backs and don't need applause to know their worth." Nancy looked down at her coffee. "You talk like I'm some hero." "No," he said. "You're not a hero. You're better. You're real." A silence stretched between them. "I'm not looking for a job," she said finally. "I'm not offering one," he replied. "I'm offering a start." Her eyes lifted. He slid a thin folder across the table. She opened it. A new venture, tech for impact startup, private funding, room on the founding team. Her name already listed. "Why me?" she whispered. Chris's voice was steady. "Because you've already done it, without a title, without backing, without safety nets. Imagine what you could build with someone who actually sees you." Nancy stared at the paper, then closed the folder. "I'm not sure I trust this," she said. He nodded. "That's okay. You don't have to say yes today." She hesitated. "What's in it for you?" Chris smiled. "Watching you prove them all wrong." That night, Nancy walked home through the rain. Not rushed, not running. When she got back to her apartment, the envelope was still on her kitchen counter. Chris's card. She didn't call. Not yet. But she did open a clean notebook. And on the first page, she wrote a name. Not his, not her father's, not Xavier's. Just one word. Nancy. Because for the first time in 5 years, she was ready to build something of her own. Chapter 6. The Girl They Tried to Break. The Goodman Group Gala wasn't meant for people like her. That much was made clear the moment Nancy stepped into the ballroom of the Grand Haven Hotel and felt the entire room hesitate. Like it was holding its breath to see what she'd do next. They had changed the sign-in sheet. Her name had been removed from the guest list, even after Chris personally told her she was welcome. Bailey's touch was all over it. Still, Nancy walked in, not because she belonged, but because she no longer cared whether they thought she did. The chandelier above her cast fractured gold across polished marble floors. Waiters in white gloves floated past with trays of champagne. Every corner whispered luxury and legacy. Every eye turned when she passed. And then came the voice. Well, look who crawled back. Bailey Goodman. A dress of liquid silver, a smirk sharper than glass, and behind her, Xavier. He didn't look surprised to see Nancy. Just amused. "Did you get lost on your way to your next charity case?" Bailey asked sweetly. Nancy said nothing. "I mean," Bailey continued, "one minute you're crashing a signing, the next, you're back with a fresh dress and a look in your eye like you still matter." "She does," Xavier cut in, smiling without warmth. "Just not in the way she used to." Nancy's jaw tightened. "Are you proud of this? Of becoming everything you used to hate?" He shrugged. "I've outgrown a lot of things." "Like honesty?" she said. "Like rickshaws," Bailey chimed, drawing laughter from a nearby group of socialites. Nancy stared at her. "You do know that most of this deal only exists because of me, right?" Bailey sipped her champagne, feigning boredom. "And yet here you are. No deal, no power, just a name that doesn't mean anything anymore." Nancy didn't reply. She didn't need to. because behind her, a quiet hush fell. Chris Goodman had entered the room. All at once, the tone changed. Men straightened their collars, women tucked hair behind ears. Everyone shifted to make room. But Chris didn't greet the crowd. He walked straight toward Nancy. Bailey's smile faltered. "Miss Campbell," Chris said smoothly, "you look stunning tonight." Nancy met his eyes. "You're late." He grinned. "Just in time." He offered his arm. Nancy took it. The gesture was small, almost elegant. But to the room, it was thunder. She wasn't here alone anymore. And Bailey knew it. Later, while the gala spun on in music and applause, Nancy stepped onto the terrace for air. Manhattan glittered beyond the glass railing, distant and impossible, like the life she once imagined with Xavier. And she'd almost given it all for him. Now she was standing here, beside a man who saw everything and still chose her. Chris followed quietly, hands in his pockets. "Will you regret coming?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I do regret how long it took me to realize I never needed to be invited." Chris leaned beside her. "They tried to break you." "I know. I failed." She turned her head. "Why did you really come back to—" He looked at her, eyes steady. "'Cause they needed to see what power really looks like." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" He answered without hesitation. "Grace under fire." The next day, Nancy's photo was everywhere. Chris Goodman leaves gala with mystery woman on his arm. "A pleasure to be a partner?" Horses say she funded the tech that launched 1,000 contracts. Xavier didn't respond to the press. Bailey did, but only by posting a blurry photo of Nancy from behind with the caption, "Still chasing invitation?" Nancy didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and sent one email to Xavier. Subject line, "The licensing deal." Message, "I'm rescinding my silent endorsement. I suggest you find another sponsor." The line, "Cindy?" Chris called an hour later. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," she said, "but he won't be." He paused. "Want to grab coffee?" She smiled. "Only if we can walk there like two nobodies." He laughed. "You'll never be a nobody again." That night, Nancy stood on her rooftop again. The city buzzed below. Her inbox was full. Interview requests, startup offers, old friends pretending they never left. She ignored them all. And she was no longer a background character in someone else's story. She was the woman who survived the worst of love, the weight of humiliation, and still stood tall. They tried to break her, but she only burned brighter. She doesn't belong, or does she? The next time Nancy walked into a Goodman Group venue, it wasn't with borrowed confidence or stitched-together courage. It was with ownership, not of the building, but of herself. This was no small industry dinner or private event. It was the annual Ascension Gala, Goodman Group's most exclusive, most watched night of the year. It was where partnerships were cemented, IPOs announced, and futures brokered over glasses of $3,000, 0-cent wine. Nancy arrived in a simple black dress with no designer tag, no publicist, and no apology. She wore her hair back, clean, honest. She had no entourage, no media team, no filters. And still, heads turned. Because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it enters a room and lets everyone else decide how they'll respond to its silence. Bailey Goodman saw her first. Her jaw visibly clenched. "She's back," she whispered to her father, Vice President Goodman, who sat beside the Goodman family's long marble banquet table. "And she's walking toward our table." VP Goodman didn't respond right away, because he too was watching. Nancy wasn't escorted, she wasn't even announced. But she walked with a purpose that no one mistook for accident. Bailey stood. "You're not on the list for this table." Nancy's expression didn't change. "I didn't ask." Bailey said, flashing a tight-lipped smile to the surrounding guests. This seat is reserved for the Goodman heir's future wife. Nancy's gaze flicked toward the chair at the center. Velvet-backed, gold-plated, untouched. Eliza said calmly, "Then I suppose I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." A ripple went through the table. Bailey scoffed. "You're shameless." "I've just stopped borrowing shame from people like you," Nancy replied. And then, without waiting, she pulled out the chair and sat. The Goodman family froze, until Chris walked in. He was in classic black, no tie, his signature watch glinting beneath his cuff. When his eyes landed on Nancy, seated where no one had ever dared sit without an engraved name card, he didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward her. Bailey rose. "Chris, sit down," he said without looking at her. And she flushed red and obeyed. He stepped behind Nancy, leaned close enough for only her to hear, and whispered, "Only they all see what I already knew." Then he took the seat beside her. The one next to his. The one reserved not for blood or birthright, but for the one who earned it with dignity. The speeches that night blurred into noise. So did the toasts. Nancy didn't touch the champagne. She didn't need to, because every clink of glass was her vindication. She caught Xavier in the corner of the room, Bailey gripping his arm so tightly it looked like possession. He wouldn't look her in the eye. He couldn't. But his mother, Dolores, did. Dolores Lee approached the table during dessert, her steps hesitant. "Miss Campbell," she said tightly, "I wanted to extend a congratulations on everything." Nancy set her fork down. "Do you mean for the company I saved, or the man I walked away from?" Dolores flushed. "I may have misjudged you." Nancy tilted her head. "No, you judged me exactly the way you wanted to. You just didn't expect to be wrong." Listen. And then Chris spoke. "She'll be hosting next year's gala," he said casually. "Right here. Same table, same seat." Was choked on her wine. Outside, after the event, under the glow of city lights, Nancy and Chris stood side by side. She was quiet. The wind tugged at her coat. "You don't have to fight for me," she said. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm fighting with you." She turned toward him. "What happens next?" He took a breath. "You choose." She searched his face for performance, for pressure, for expectation. But she found none. Just faith. Just possibility. Then she smiled, slow, soft, and real. "In that case," she said, "I'm not done yet." Because they said she didn't belong. But now, even the most powerful man in the room was standing beside her. And the seat they told her she wasn't worthy of? Was already hers. Chapter 8. Secrets Served Cold. The letter came in a white envelope with Goodman Group's gold seal embossed on the flap. Nancy didn't open it right away. She made tea, watered the plant on her windowsill, sat with her hands in her lap for a long, long time. Then, with quiet resolve, she peeled it open. It wasn't a formality. It was an offer. Termination of licensing partnership Lee Innovations. Paired and signed by Goodman Group's legal department. At her request, all it needed was her signature. If she signed it, Xavier's entire deal would dissolve. His company would lose its biggest partner. His board would collapse. His valuation would plummet. And the man who once said she wasn't from his world would be right back where he started. Without her. Nancy stared at the line that read, "Authorized by N. Campbell." A part of her wanted to sign it in red ink, just to make the message louder. But instead, she picked up her pen and paused. Not yet. Not until he saw, and she didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, Xavier requested a meeting. The subject line of his email was one word: please. Nancy set the time and place, 7:00 p.m., downtown, the same diner they used to dream in. She got there early, sat in their old booth, let the memories float, then fade. When Xavier arrived, he looked worn. His designer coat hung looser than usual. His jaw was tighter, but his pride still entered the room 2 steps ahead of him. "You look good," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. She didn't smile. "I read the letter," he said. "They said it came from you." And she waited. "You're really going to pull the plug on everything we built?" Nancy tilted her head. "We didn't build it. I did. You just kept the credit." He leaned in, dropping his voice. "You can't be serious. If you sign that document, you'll ruin me." "Now, Xavier," she said, "you ruined yourself the moment you decided I was disposable." "I was ambitious. You were selfish. I made mistakes. You made choices." He stared at her, something angry and desperate blooming behind his eyes. "I've changed." "Then prove it," she said. "Acknowledge what you did, publicly." "You want a confession?" he snapped. "A press conference? Maybe for your forgiveness?" She didn't flinch. "I want the truth," she said, "in your voice, for once." Xavier slumped back. "Why now?" Nancy's answer came quietly. "Because power only means something when you decide how to use it." She pulled a second envelope from her purse. Not the termination letter. Press release. Xavier Lee officially acknowledges collaborative development with Nancy Campbell. Goodman Group will proceed with co-founder status and revenue share adjustment. He blinked. "You're giving me a choice?" Nancy nodded. "I don't need revenge. I need accountability. And if you can't give it, then yes. I'll sign the termination." Xavier looked down, read every line, slowly, thoroughly. Then he whispered, "I'll do it." The next morning, the story broke. Xavier Lee acknowledges patent contributions from former partner Nancy Campbell. Revenue to be recalculated, new co-founder title confirmed. Goodman Group maintains partnership with a different name at the helm. The last line was the one that mattered most. Because starting now, every pitch deck, every investor call, every credit line tied to that patent would bear her name. Nancy Campbell. No longer a shadow. No longer a secret. Bailey's reaction was swift and public. She posted a cryptic story on her social feed. "People only rise when someone else lets go of the rope. Doesn't mean they know how to climb." Chris Goodman reposted it, with just one line underneath. "People don't need ropes. They build wings." Then Nancy didn't respond. She didn't need to, because her face was on the cover of Forbes Tech Weekly by Friday. The quiet force behind BioLock, how Nancy Campbell rewrote the story without saying a word. That weekend she visited her mother. They hadn't spoken in over a year. The Campbell estate in Long Island still looked like a castle Nancy never wanted to be princess of. Her mother answered the door, jaw tight, pearls at her collar. "I read the article," she said. "I figured. You've made quite the name for yourself." Nancy replied, "I reclaimed it." A long silence passed. Then, quietly, her mother said, "Your father would have never approved." "I know." Her mother nodded, then looked away. "I'm not here for approval," Nancy added. "I'm here to say goodbye." And then she left. Later that night, on the balcony of Chris's penthouse overlooking the Hudson, he handed her a glass of ginger tea. "I heard you burned a bridge," he said. "I did," she said, "and I watched it light up the sky." Chris leaned closer. "So, what's next?" Nancy looked out across the city. "Lee," she said, "I build something that no one can take credit for but me." He smiled. "Let me know if you want a partner." She turned to him. Soft, clear, unshaken. "I already have one." Because sometimes, the sweetest justice isn't destroying someone. It's watching them realize they never built anything without you. And this time, she would be the only one holding the pen. Chapter 9. The Heiress and the Scars. The Campbell family estate hadn't changed. Same manicured hedges, same ivory pillars, same cold echo in the halls where warmth was never welcome. Nancy hadn't been home in 5 years. But now, she stood at the front gate with her name on every headline in America, and not one part of her felt nervous. Her mother had called first, then her father's lawyer, then her father himself. "Come home," he'd said over the phone. "We can discuss restoring your trust, your seat on the board." Nancy didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just walked through the gates on a Sunday morning, letting her heels echo across the stone path like thunder through memory. Inside the estate, the Campbells were waiting. Her mother, Evelyn. Cold, elegant, unreadable. Her father, Leonard. Iron-jawed jaw, steel-eyed, too used to being right. Her cousins, already seated, pretending not to be shocked that she had returned. "Nancy," Evelyn said, standing. "What's changed?" Leonard added. She didn't respond. "I see the media has been kind," he went on, pouring himself a scotch despite the hour. "But we both know perception is temporary, power is permanent." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "That why you disowned me at 20? Her father's jaw twitched. "We were trying to protect the family," Evelyn said. "You were making choices, emotional ones." "I was 17, Nancy replied, "and pregnant." Silent. Her father set down his glass. "We want to bring you back in, publicly. The board is prepared to offer you a non-voting seat for now." "I'm not interested," she said. Everyone froze. Leonard blinked. "Excuse me?" Nancy smiled gently. "You're offering a place at a table I no longer want to sit at. I came back to say thank you." "Thank you?" Evelyn asked, confused. Nancy nodded. "For showing me that blood isn't always family, that silence can hurt more than violence, that walking away sometimes saves you." Leonard straightened. "You're making a mistake." Nancy said, "I made the mistake when I thought being born a Campbell meant I owed you my life." She left the estate without looking back. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an imposter. She felt whole. That evening, she drove to the Queens neighborhood where she used to live with Xavier. The building was still there, peeling paint, humming neon signs, smells of dumplings and street hot dogs. She stood on the sidewalk, remembering who she used to be. The girl who made $8.00 tips and wired them straight into someone else's dreams. And then she took out her phone. "Nancy to Chris. I'm not going back to the Campbells. I'm starting something of my own. Are you still in?" Chris. "Always was." 3 weeks later, the launch event for her new tech accelerator, Quiet Flame Ventures, made headlines. A startup incubator designed specifically for underfunded women-led tech firms, backed by Chris Goodman, led by Nancy Campbell. The waiting list had 600 applicants in 2 days. The first 3 chosen? A formerly homeless black woman developing portable insulin cooling kits. A Labrina engineer rebuilding drone tech for wildfire response. A teenage coder from Detroit designing anti-bullying algorithms. Nancy didn't speak at the press conference. She stood quietly while Chris introduced the program, while founders shook her hand with tears in their eyes. Her voice wasn't needed. Her presence was enough. That night, after the event, Nancy returned home to a small, sun-filled apartment in Brooklyn. The couch had a coffee stain. The bookshelf leaned left. There were flowers on the table, fresh daisies. Chris had left them with a note. For the girl who built the future without asking for credit. She stared at the note for a long time, and then picked up her phone. "Come over. I have wine. On my way." Later, as the city quieted outside and their glasses clinked, Chris said, "You ever think about what might have happened if you'd stayed with Xavier?" Nancy looked out the window. "I would have disappeared," she said, "one quiet compromise at a time." Chris reached over, laced his fingers with hers. "You didn't just survive him," he said. "You surpassed him." Nancy nodded. Turns out, she said, scars don't mean you're broken. I mean you healed where it hurt most. And that night, with the lights low and her heart finally quiet, Nancy realized she hadn't just walked away from the Campbells. She'd walked into the life she was always meant to lead. Not as an heiress, but as herself. Chapter 10. Let Them Fall. The Grand Hotel ballroom glittered with expectation. The annual Goodman Private Investors Banquet wasn't just a celebration. It was a battlefield disguised in velvet and gold. The city's most powerful families gathered here to show who still mattered and who no longer did. But this year, there was a shift. Everyone knew it, felt it, because the most talked about name on the guest list wasn't old money or inherited power. It was Nancy Campbell, the girl they had mocked, the one they'd called a rickshaw driver, a mistake, a phase. Now she was hosting her own table. Now she was Chris Goodman's partner, in life, in venture, and in legacy. Bailey sat 2 tables away, her expression tight behind a champagne glass. Xavier beside her, pale and stiff in his tuxedo. His company still existed, but no longer in his name. His title now read Technical Advisor, Co-Founder. Every press release carried Nancy's name first. She hadn't even had to fire him. She just stepped out of his shadow and let the light show what was real. Chris stood beside her near the stage, speaking to a Wall Street financier. Nancy wasn't listening. Her eyes had locked on the Campbells. Her parents were here. DeLong and Leveling Campbell. Their smiles were brittle. They hadn't been invited. But they had shown up anyway, hungry to prove they were still connected to. Leonard approached, with a glass of bourbon in hand. Sorry. She turned. You look powerful, he said, voice neutral. I am, she replied simply. He nodded. Your mother and I would like to talk. In private. There's nothing I need from you, Nancy said, unless it's a genuine apology. Evelyn stepped forward. You're still our daughter. Nancy said calmly. I'm the woman who succeeded after you left her for dead. Gasped nearby. But Nancy didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Leonard's smile twisted. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not playing anything, she said. I'm building. There's a difference. Later that evening, the lights dimmed, and Chris took the stage. Tonight, he said, we celebrate not just legacy, but evolution. He paused, looked at Nancy, and no one embodies that more than the woman beside me. Spotlight shifted. Nancy rose. The room fell still. She stepped onto the stage. No script. Just presence. My name is Nancy Campbell, she said, and for a long time I thought I had to stay quiet to survive. And she paused. I was wrong. Do you remember? She continued. I gave, I built, I waited, and then I watched people twist my silence into shame. But silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's the breath you hold before the fire starts. And she looked toward her father. Tonight, I could expose every deal, every lie, every name that stepped on someone smaller to stay on top. I could let the Goodman Group blacklist them. She let the pause stretch. I could let them fall. Tension rippled through the crowd. Bailey's hand tightened around her fork. Why won't? Nancy said. Relief, confusion, curiosity. Because I don't need to destroy anyone to prove I've already won. She smiled, calm and deadly. I'm not here to take revenge. She looked at Xavier, at Bailey, at her parents. I'm here to remind you, I was never beneath you. You just didn't look close enough. Applause burst, scattered at first, then thunderous. Nancy stepped down from the stage, unshaken. Chris met her halfway. You didn't burn the house down, he whispered. 9, she said, taking his hand. I built something better next door. As the room roared around them, Xavier sat silent. Bailey's eyes burned. The Campbells slipped out before dessert. But Nancy stayed in the glow, in the truth, in her own power. But she hadn't let them fall. She'd made them watch as she rose. And that was enough. A woman who didn't break. They used to whisper about her. The poor girl who followed a man like a shadow. The girl who gave too much and expected too little. The one who was left and never seemed to fight back. But that was the thing they never understood about Nancy Campbell. She didn't need to fight loudly. She fought long, in silence, in sacrifice, in the kind of strength that doesn't ask to be noticed. And now, the world had noticed anyway. In the months that followed the banquet, Nancy declined more interviews than she gave. She turned down brand offers, book deals, and cover stories with questions like, "How does it feel to finally win?" She didn't feel like she'd won. She felt free. Quiet Flame Ventures opened its first full accelerator cohort in a converted firehouse in Brooklyn. The walls still smelled like old smoke and new paint. Her name was etched into the cornerstone, not as an heiress, not as a CEO's wife, just as a founder. She was home. She and Chris never made a grand announcement. No diamond ring post, no press release. One day he simply moved in and stayed. He folded his shirts next to hers. He replaced her broken tea kettle. He whispered, "I love you," in the kitchen while she made coffee with bed hair and mismatched socks. There was no contract, no performance. Just two people, side by side, walking toward a life that finally fit. One morning, Nancy stood on the rooftop of her apartment, now their apartment, holding a mug of chamomile and watching the city breathe. Chris wrapped his arms around her from behind. "He still thinks about them," he asked. "The ones who hurt me?" she replied. He nodded. She took a slow sip of her tea, then whispered, "Sometimes, but not with anger anymore, just with clarity." Chris kissed her temple. "You didn't let them break you." She leaned into him. "I let them reveal me. I let them reveal me." Because here's what no one tells you. Sometimes your power isn't in what you say. It's in what you survive. It's in choosing not to destroy when you've been handed every reason to. It's in walking away, not with bitterness, but with your name intact. Nancy didn't win because she got even. She won because she remembered who she was and chose not to forget again. So to every woman watching this, to the one who gave too much, loved too hard, stayed too long, this story is for you. Not because you need rescuing, but because you deserve to know. You can walk away from anything that forgets your worth. And one day, someone will love you for your silence, your fire, your scars, all of it. So tell us, when did you realize you were worth more than what they gave you? Drop your story in the comments. We're listening. And love, as always, finds its way.